Mr. Speaker, I believe we can better align domestic water tariff tiers to actual consumption by households with a view to reducing water bills for households that conserve water. The last time domestic water tariff tiers were restructured, it took place over 4 years from 1997 to 2000. At the end of that exercise, water prices went up more than 120%. A major impetus for that price hike was the argument that Singapore would be short of water after the expiry of the 2011 water agreement with Malaysia. A parallel objective of the exercise was to get Singaporeans to treat water as a precious and strategic resource and to make water conservation a way of life. Waterborne fees were also raised to recover the cost of wastewater treatment. Prior to the year 2000, the domestic water tariff regime had 3 tiers to correspond to different consumption levels. The 3 tiers of water prices for domestic use were as follows. Households that used 0 to 20 cubic meters of water a month, followed by those that used 20 to 40 cubic meters, and finally those that used more than 40 cubic meters a month. After the water pricing restructuring exercise from the year 2000, the government did away with 3 tiers for domestic users and proceeded with only 2 tiers. A household today is charged differently only if it consumes more than 40 cubic meters a month. If you consumed below 20 cubic meters of water a month, you will be charged at a rate between 0 to 40 cubic meters, since there is no specific tier between 0 to 20 cubic meters of water anymore. Arising from the changes in the year 2000, the government decided that it was not going to continue charging households at the lowest rate tier because these households were not subject to a significant water conservation tax. Based on publicly available information I have perused, there was no argument canvassed for specifically moving away from a 3-tier to a 2-tier water pricing regime for households beyond general statements of intent, and it was not explained why an increase in the water conservation tax could not be imposed for those consuming between 0 to 20 cubic meters of water per month to cohere with treating each drop of water as a precious resource. However, arising from the low amount of water conservation tax paid, it was advanced that these households in the lowest domestic tier had little to no incentive to save water. Prior to the changes to the water pricing structure in 2000, about 56% of Singaporean households used less than 20 cubic meters of water and paid no water conservation tax. 34% of households paid for water at the next tier, which was between 20 to 40 cubic meters of water with a low water conservation tax. The 10% of households that consumed more than 40 cubic meters of water paid a smaller water conservation tax at 15% than non-domestic consumers at 20%. The latter was deemed by the government to be an unsatisfactory state of affairs, as large non-domestic water users or businesses were assessed to often recycle a large proportion of the water they used and were not necessarily more wasteful than large domestic users. The government argued that the existing pricing structure would jack up business costs and affect Singapore's business costs and competitiveness, and would also fail to have a significant effect on smaller households paying lower domestic rates. Compared to 56% of households in the past who consumed between 0 to 20 cubic meters of water, today 96% of households are consuming between 0 to 40 cubic meters of water, with HDB dwellers consuming 16.2 cubic meters of water per month in 2020. Evidently, these HDB households in particular are paying for water at the lower of the 2 tiers, but this supposedly lower tier captures users within a very wide pricing band of 0 to 40 cubic meters. I call on the government to look into the prospect of restructuring water pricing tiers so as to more accurately reflect water usage with a view to incentivize water conservation and lower costs for households. The current 2-tier compared to the legacy 3-tier structure for domestic users does not fairly reflect water consumption patterns. In fact, a case can be made that it puts a heavier water conservation tax burden for the majority of users whose overall consumption patterns are already located in the lower half of the current 0 to 40 cubic meters band. To this end, Mr. Speaker, I ask the government to look into the introduction of a fairer and more acutely tiered tariff structure reflecting actual consumption of water from 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40, and 40 and above cubic meters, with a view to encouraging greater efforts at water conservation. This should be coupled with a graduated water conservation tax regime, starting at 30% for those consuming between 0 to 10 cubic meters of water and hitting 60% for households that consume between 30 to 40 cubic meters of water per month, so that households that consume more water cross-subsidize those that consume less. A graduated water conservation tax across the various tiers would incentivize water conservation and continue to serve the policy purpose of ensuring that water is continually treated as a scarce commodity. With this more acutely tiered water pricing regime, the quantum of fiscal support provided through GST U-Save vouchers can be right-sized proportionately. Under such a fairer tariff structure, the 96% of households consuming less than 40 cubic meters of water today would be charged a water conservation tax that more progressively reflects how much they actually consume, and the households ought to see a reduction in water charges.